Hopefully it will. Hopefully I'll make it past this presentation. It always sounds like a good idea to work together, and then you start working together, and it still sounds like a good idea? No, it does. It's been fun. The title of the presentation is Purpose, Perspective, and Practice, what we can learn about faith integration from Christian professors teaching in non-Christian cross-cultural contexts. That's about all the words I know. It's about the longest title I've ever written. And I'm wondering, actually, as we've done this project, we imagined it. This is the disclaimer. We're hoping actually to get some input from you guys, because what we found out as we went into it, that we're just scratching the surface. And I think we're presenting these ideas, and there might be better ways to do it, and we're open. So this is not a finished product. The research is fresh, and you know, when you got research, especially qualitative research, it just sometimes takes a while to play with it and get it in a form that makes sense. So if at the end this doesn't make sense, don't be afraid to say, hey, maybe you should think about doing it this way. If it's amazing, tell us that too. I mean, I'm an affirmation junkie, so I can use all I can get. When speaking of best practices, and that's where we headed out. I'm not sure we ended up at best practices, but that's okay. But when speaking of best practices in integration of faith and learning, the typical conversation usually immediately goes to classroom methodologies. What can I do in the classroom? And certainly as professors, our concern for what happens in the classroom highlights our motivation that brought us to this profession in the first place. And certainly as Christian professors, we want to make our classroom instruction honoring to God. However, as I've been looking at it, and particularly the way we do it at LeTu, could it be that our immediate daily pressure to deliver effective instruction in the classroom causes an inadvertent truncation of the best faith integration practices? Let me give you an example. Question of when does class begin? We typically almost require devos, right? At the beginning of our classes. And you know what the devos are, 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of class. Well, while the intent is to integrate faith into the classroom, and the devotional practice is key to that as we see it, it actually, in my perspective, tends to highlight the bifurcation of faith and practice, or faith and work, or faith and learning. Because you do the devotional, and then maybe class begins, as far as the content of the class. And so when does class begin? And I think that was highlighted as I heard a few stories this past year, as we had several Muslim students on campus who caught this bifurcation and would arrive to class 10 minutes late, because apparently they understood that class began when you said amen, and then we went to the content. And so it didn't integrate. It actually, the devotional practice, if that's all you were doing, was highlighting the bifurcation. So, as I said here, apparently nothing is done in the first 10 minutes of class that bears on their success in the class. So it's clearly demarcated, not integrated. So I think clearly there's more to best practice than what is done in the classroom. And even somebody like John Hennessy, president of Stanford University, understands this. We have to remember that the undergraduate experience is a whole experience. He was addressing online education, but I think if it's a whole experience for the student, it needs to be a whole experience for the professor. And so that's where we're going at it. While the professors have little control of the mindset of the students when they walk into the classroom, we do have control over our own thinking and attitude, approach, preparation before we ever get to the classroom. So, with that in mind, and I'm doing this part, right? Okay. Our intended purpose. I'm sorry, it wasn't marked on my sheet.
I'm just clearing your throat.
You're just clearing your throat. All right, so our intended purpose in this project is to study Christian university professors who teach a non-Christian cross-cultural context and glean insights into best practices of integration of faith and learning. These insights will be ordered in a discipleship model. We went with an assumption that it's when you're teaching cross-culturally and particularly in a non-Christian context, say when you can't do devotionals, then how do you integrate? Without the supports that say we have here with chapel 3 times a week, devotionals in the dorm rooms and devotionals classes. Without those supports, how are you integrated? And we were saying that it has to flow out, if you will, the life of the professor in some way. And that it would be, if you will, deeper or more true integration. So we use the discipleship model advocated by Dallas Willard that focuses on purpose, perspective, and practice. Those aren't his words, those are words that we adapted so that they would be 3 Ps. Okay. And my name's Pat, and so it just seemed to be good. The model promotes a reconnection or a connection, however you want to say it, of what the professor does in the classroom to one's academic approach and one's own spiritual formation, because it should flow out of our own spiritual formation. So with that in mind, Kathleen will talk about methodology.
Yeah, so this is a quality.
Or just hold it.
Okay. This is a qualitative study. Some of you may know that we spent some time overseas with International Institute for Christian Studies, which is an academic mission organization that places Christian professors in secular universities outside of North America. And we just celebrated our 25th year anniversary as an organization and changed our name to Global Scholars. So I might get mixed up if I say International Institute for Christian Studies, IICS, or if I say Global Scholars, it's the same thing. And we just had our 25th year anniversary, and we had a big conference, and it was our captive audience, so we were able to interview 15 of the 45 professors in the organization. So these were face-to-face, one-on-one interviews, a variety of academic disciplines, and there we go. And just so you'll get a flavor, these are the locations and their academic disciplines. Broad range. And we know these people personally. Of course, we didn't put their names up there. Some of them are in sensitive areas. Almost all of them have their doctorates. Maybe just 1 or 2 have their master's degrees. Before we get to the framework, just know that what we were looking for, we went into it already knowing the mission of IICS and Global Scholars, but we wanted to try to listen with fresh eyes and ears to, okay, professors, what are you doing? So we created a questionnaire with 17 questions, and they were in those categories of purpose, perspective, and practice, the 3 things he's going to describe here in a second. And after getting all of our results, it was all one-on-one, face-to-face. After getting all those results, then we started looking for the themes that would emerge. We ended up with 6 or 8 themes, and we'll fill in the model here in a minute with that to show you. But he'll describe, I guess, the framework. This is fun, isn't it?
I will say that we learned a little bit about qualitative research. 17 questions in an interview is way too many. And actually, in the middle of it, we actually went down to basically 3 questions as we were morphing into these interviews. I don't know what we were thinking. I knew better than that, but you know, you have grandiose ideas. At any rate, that's to indicate the work in progress feeling of what we're presenting to you. But the theological framework. The theological assumption of this study is that integration of faith and learning can be seen in terms of discipleship. We believe that it's appropriate because the professorial role is a vocation, a calling. And as a Christian professor, one's calling to submit everything to the Lordship of Christ is very important. So drawing from and adapting the work, as I mentioned earlier, of Dallas Willard, we're structuring around 3 things. The first one is purpose. A Christ-formed life reveals purpose for one's place in the world. In discipleship terms, it's the recognition of one's nature as an, quote, unceasing spiritual being with an eternal destiny in God's great universe, who is disconnected from God, others, and self by sin, yet restored to God's intentions through Christ and living creatively in the world. So as professors, restored to wholeness, right? Hopefully, we begin to see ourselves like that. We see one's academic field in view of God, or as God sees it. I got fancy words written here, but basically we're thinking, God's wired us a particular way, yeah? And we have particular interest, and things spark in us. And God's put those there, and we see it in various ways. And as professors, it's revealed in our discipline. So there's something about who we are as God made us that we see God in our discipline, and then God is reflected in our discipline. And that's, it's at a very deep level, and we were trying to dig some of that out. So that's purpose. Moving on. And I'm sorry it's black. It showed up great on my computer. But anyway, that's how sometimes black on red doesn't work. The next thing is what I really call the bridge element. And that is perspective. Is that as we understand who we are in terms of how God made us, then the incarnation begins to play a role as God becomes human, the person of Jesus Christ. So that holds that physical, spiritual dominion in what Mark Knoll calls consubstantial holism. So there's a word you can go look up. I recommend you read the Jesus Christ and the Life of the Mind. He talks about consubstantial holism as the philosophical construct for Christian professors. There's a lot of unpacking we don't have time to do with that anytime you use multiple syllabic words. But anyway, consubstantial holism. It's where in other words, as Christians, we should be able, we should understand how to hold two things in creative tension. That shouldn't be a problem with us. It shouldn't be either or. It should be both and. So perspective. So within this idea, Christ becomes our informer, right? As we are discipled, and we come out with new insides, if you will, as Christians, as we begin to be Christ-formed. So spiritual formation and tradition of Jesus Christ is the process of transformation of the inmost dimension of the human heart. It is being formed, or really transformed, in such a way that its natural expression comes to be the deeds of Christ done in the power of Christ. And so, we say, how do we get this? Well, classically and historically, we do it through spiritual disciplines. So we're talking about, what we think of as discipleship. And then that brings about a new way of seeing the world. And so we'll talk more about that here in a minute. And then finally, practice. And you finally say, best practice is finally practice. Exactly. So when we have this clear vision of God's creation, typically seen through our discipline, right? And when we are intentionally are becoming like Christ, then it should come out in our practices, done in His name. So the integration of faith and learning flows from God's purpose as viewed from Christ's transformed perspective, results in effective methodologies for the classroom and beyond. Dallas Willard has a simple, great statement. It says, "It is what we are that determines what we ought to do." So that's the idea here. So it goes into practices. So what we're going to get to now is you're going to hear from the professors, what they said. And while this is where it gets tricky, so I'm going to say a little something, and then we're working on a model up here, and this is a work in progress. I'm going to start filling some of it in. And what we identified under each purpose, under each P, we identified kind of two key words that most of the quotations that we're going to give you kind of coalesced around. All right, and the first one for purpose is the word identity. That here, as we understand who we are and how God made us in terms of our life's calling and our work, that begins to infiltrate into other areas of our life. And so, Kathleen will do this, and I will write on the board.
That's what he wanted to do anyway, is just write on the board. Okay, so under purpose, two of the themes that emerged, identity and integration both. He had to make it both eyes, all right? So identity, as he said, these are, we chose just for presentation purposes to pull out quotes because they're really very inspiring, and I think you'll resonate with several of them. Right off the bat, my academic discipline is intertwined and cannot be separated from God. The SS, that's my key because I know who these people are. She's a music professor, and she had lots to say, very excited about her discipline, I can tell you. You see the human condition in literature, you can't get away from God. And I think really we can't get away from God, whatever our discipline, right? But that's probably universal. Any physical sciences here? Biology screams God's creation. And so this fellow and his wife are in Uganda, and they're busy. He's either very motivated with his area is plant genetics and plant breeding, and with the motivation to help solve some world hunger problems. He also said, molecular biology is inspirational. He said, and we have it written down, he said, well, when I really want to relax, just pure recreation, I find a good book on molecular biology. We thought, hey, you know, that must be how God made you, because he didn't make me that way.
And I'll just jump in here. Understanding this fellow, if we were talking about molecular biology, he comes alive. And I tell you what was part of my inspiration here. If any of you saw Chariots of Fire, in the old movie about the runner, and remember when he says, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And it was freeing to him. I can run. I don't have to be this. I can do who I'm made to be. And I think as professors, that's what we bring to it. And for I can't say his
Paul.
name. Well, I guess we said his name, Paul.
Yeah, PG.
He read it for inspiration. He read it for God's inspiration. Okay.
Yep.
So anyway.
Yeah, so this is where we really saw the passion of professors, their passion for teaching, but their passion for their discipline. And the last one in this little group, my view is that talents are God-given and we're created to flourish and glorify God. This gal teaches educational psychology, and so it's fundamental, I think, in education that you're looking to help bring up the talents or the abilities in a person, but the Christian view is, well, those talents come from God, and so hers fits beautifully, and that's a direct quote, so we were able to say, hey, she matches up with what we were thinking. Our second piece under purpose, there was identity, that whole passionate who I am thing, and then the second piece was integration. And this is where people were starting to say, okay, there's some interconnectedness here with, as Pat was saying, with my faith and with my discipline. And some of these will seem maybe obvious, but the folks really talked about them a lot. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
The idea here of integration, there's something about when we understand who we are as God made us, then we don't become singular people, we actually become integrated people. And we're able to see, all of them are talking about, I began to see connections. Not only in other disciplines and other things, and so that was the idea here, but it flowed out of this purpose.
Yes, in this quote, this fellow is a theologian, and he's teaching in Lithuania, but he doesn't necessarily get to teach theology classes. He has to maneuver around. He's teaching a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of English, a little bit of sociology and social work. And so, but he talked a long time about, we know, you have your beliefs, and so therefore you act. But he really emphasized the circular motion of that. You believe and you act and you believe and you act, and it just keeps, it goes back and forth. It just is not linear at all. And he talked for some time about that, emphasizing that. And then this gal had a similar thing to say there. She's a communication professor. Reading fiction and nonfiction. This is back to the Ed Psych gal. She talked about how she draws from sources from all over. And so she's deep into her discipline, but she's also broad in her awareness and what she exposes herself to. And need work and play. This fella has a PhD in recreation and leisure studies. Isn't that great? And he just talks about playing all the time. And his key thing is he asks people, his students, tell me about your free time. Evaluate your free time. What do you do? And he can make a beautiful case for the idea of entering into the rest of your Savior, entering into the rest of God, that is a place that is recreational, it's playful, and it's worshipful. He has a beautiful philosophy, and that's a good reminder, but he's talking work and play, and that they're both essential, there's an integrative thing there. This fella teaches in Bulgaria, and he's talking here about the complexity of life. And so you have a complex discipline, but it's also complex because, when you just look at the world and look at people and look at their relationships and look at everything we do and know. There's just very few things that are simple and straightforward. So we've got to be integrated, because otherwise we give something that's simple and false, really. So we have to be willing to tackle the complexities. And he also said this, and I just think that's so good. And he's not just talking, he's talking about the best science that can, not just physical science, the best science of any of our disciplines still doesn't completely answer the questions. So we've got to integrate, or else we're just giving something we're offering something limited. This is our leisure guy. And keep in mind that all of these professors are teaching in a cross-cultural context, and generally with people coming from unchurched backgrounds, probably very little spirituality in their lives. And so these professors are really in the business of trying to find connectedness or integrative pieces to draw them towards looking at even just spiritual things, and then maybe Christian things. You want to add to that?
There's a song that we like by a guy named John Fisher. He said, Jesus, in the song, says, Jesus is the only way, there's more than one way to